Romance wasn't a fairy tale. It was a luxury Claire couldn't afford. Between double shifts and overdue bills, dating apps were merely a temporary distraction from a crushing reality. Then, a careless right swipe on a grease-stained mechanic changed her life forever. Because that mechanic basically owned the city. The fluorescent light above the kitchen sink flickered, emitting a low, angry buzz that set Claire's teeth on edge. It was 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. On the chipped formica table in front of her sat a stack of envelopes with red, final notice stamps, a half-empty mug of room-temperature tea, and a plastic dinosaur missing its head. Claire rubbed the heels of her hands into her eyes until sparks danced in her vision. She was 28, but the deep grooves around her mouth made her feel 50. Being a single mother to a 6-year-old boy didn't just age you, it hollowed you out. It turned every waking hour into a high-stakes math equation where the numbers never actually added up. Rent took the bulk. Groceries took the rest. And Leo's asthma inhalers ate whatever pennies managed to slip through the cracks. With a heavy sigh, she picked up her phone. The screen was spiderwebbed with cracks, a casualty of Leo dropping it in the grocery store parking lot 3 months ago. She opened a dating app. She wasn't looking for love. Love was a liability. Love was her ex-husband walking out because the responsibility of a sick toddler was cramping his evolution. Claire was just looking for 5 minutes of adult conversation where she wasn't discussing utility bills or coaxing a child to eat broccoli. She swiped left. A guy holding a dead fish. Left. A guy standing in front of a leased BMW wearing sunglasses indoors. Left. A guy whose entire bio was a quote about alpha energy. Left. Then she paused. The profile belonged to a man named Ian. No age listed, just a picture. He wasn't posing. The photo looked like it had been snapped mid-conversation by a friend. He was standing in a dimly lit garage, wiping his hands on a filthy rag. He wore a faded gray t-shirt tucked into dark work pants. There was a smudge of black grease on his left cheekbone. His hair was dark and messy, not styled, just shoved out of his face. But it was his eyes that caught her. They were sharp, tired, but steady. His bio was aggressively brief. I fix things. I like quiet mornings. Not looking for drama. Claire snorted. Join the club, Ian. She swiped right. The screen instantly flashed. It's a match. She tossed the phone onto the table and went to check on Leo. He was fast asleep, one arm slung over his stuffed bear, his chest rising and falling in a steady, reassuring rhythm. Claire stood in the doorway for a long time, the familiar cocktail of fierce love and suffocating guilt tightening her throat. She wanted to give him the world. Instead, she was giving him off-brand cereal and a tired mother. When she walked back to the kitchen, her phone buzzed. Ian, you're up late? Shift work or insomnia? Claire stared at the message. It was a normal question. No sleazy opener. No unsolicited pictures. Claire, a little of both. Single mom. The quiet hours are the only time I get to hear myself think. She expected him to unmatch. A lot of guys bolted at the phrase single mom. It was a built-in filter for the unserious. A minute passed. Then, the typing bubble appeared. Ian, I get that. I work with loud machinery all day. When the shop closes, the silence is the best part of the job. What do you do? They texted for an hour. It was easy. Claire didn't have to pretend to be a bubbly, carefree 20-something. She told him she was an administrative assistant at a dental supply logistics firm. He told her he worked on engines. He didn't ask probing questions about her ex, and she didn't ask him about his income. It was a transaction of mutual loneliness, safe and contained within the cracked glass of her phone screen. The next morning, reality came crashing back with the sound of grinding metal. Claire sat in the driver's seat of her 2008 Honda Civic, turning the key. Click, 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 whine. No, 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 she whispered, gripping the steering wheel. She glanced at the rear-view mirror. Leo was kicking his feet in his booster seat, oblivious to the catastrophe unfolding in the driver's seat. "Mommy, we're going to be late for school," he announced. "I know, baby. Mommy's trying." She turned the key again. The engine shuddered violently, let out a pathetic wheeze, and died. Smoke began to curl lazily from under the hood. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. If the car was dead, she couldn't get Leo to school. If Leo didn't go to school, she couldn't go to work. If she missed another shift, her manager, a man who viewed human illness as a personal insult to his profit margins, would fire her. And she had exactly $42 in her checking account. A tow truck alone would cost $100. A mechanic would cost hundreds more. She rested her forehead against the steering wheel and squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back the tears. Crying didn't fix engines. She pulled out her phone to call an Uber she couldn't afford. As the screen unlocked, it opened to her chat with Ian from the night before. Out of pure, irrational desperation, her fingers flew across the keyboard. "Claire, my car just died. Smoke from the hood. I am literally going to lose my mind." She didn't expect a reply. It was 7:30 a.m. He was probably at work. She booked the Uber, grabbed Leo's backpack, and hurried him out of the car. By the time she dropped Leo off and sat down at her desk, severely late and nursing a migraine, her phone buzzed. "Ian, where is it parked? I have my tools in my truck. I can go look at it on my lunch break." Claire stared at the screen. People didn't just do favors. Not in her world. Everything had a price. "Claire, Ian, I can't afford a mechanic right now. I have $42 to my name until Friday." "Ian, did I ask for your bank statement? Just give me the address, Claire." She gave him her apartment address and the spot number. She spent the rest of the workday bracing for a text telling her the engine was blown, the head gasket was fried, and she needed a new car. She imagined him giving her a quote she couldn't pay, holding her keys hostage. At 1:15 p.m., he texted, "Ian, it's the starter. Also, your battery terminals were corroded to hell and back. I swapped the starter and cleaned the connections. It's running fine now. Keys are under the floor mat." Claire stopped breathing. She read the text 3 times. "Claire, you swapped the starter? How? Where did you get the part?" "Ian, had a refurbished one sitting in the shop that fit a Honda. Was just taking up space." Claire, "Ian, I have to pay you. Ian, you owe me a beer or a sandwich, whatever you can afford. See you around, Claire." She sat back in her cheap office chair, staring blindly at a spreadsheet of dental drill bits. A stranger had just saved her job. A guy from a dating app, a mechanic with grease on his face, had just thrown a lifeline to a drowning woman without waiting to see if she had the cash to pay for the rope. Claire insisted on dinner. It was the only way she could swallow the pride that was lodged sideways in her throat. She couldn't let a stranger absorb the cost of a car part and 2 hours of labor. "I make a mean grilled cheese and tomato soup," she texted him. "Come by at 7 o'clock. When a sharp knock sounded at her apartment door precisely at 7, Claire felt a sudden, absurd spike of nerves. She wiped her hands on her jeans, checked her reflection in the microwave door, and pulled it open. Ian was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, filling the narrow doorway of her cheap apartment. He wore steel-toed boots that looked like they had survived a war, dark jeans, and a plain black Henley. His hands were tucked into his pockets, and when he pulled one out to offer a wave, she noticed the knuckles were bruised, the skin permanently stained with faint shadows of engine oil. "Hey," he said. His voice was low, gravelly, entirely devoid of the slick confidence she associated with men trying to impress a date. "Hey," Claire breathed. "Come in. Please ignore the mess." She stepped aside, hyper-aware of her surroundings, the worn carpet, the pile of laundry on the worn-out sofa, the toys scattered across the floor like landmines. Ian walked in, his eyes sweeping the room. But they didn't hold judgment. They just took in the data. "Oh, smells good," he noted, nodding toward the stove where the soup was simmering. "Mommy, who is the giant?" Claire winced as Leo stepped out of the hallway, clutching a plastic action figure, staring openly at the stranger. "Leo, it's polite to say hello," Claire corrected gently. "This is Ian. He's the nice man who fixed Mommy's car." Ian dropped into a crouch, his knees popping audibly, bringing himself down to Leo's eye level. He didn't use a fake, high-pitched voice. He spoke to the boy like a grown man. "Hey, Leo, that a space ranger?" Ian pointed to the toy. "Yeah, he fights aliens," Leo said, stepping a little closer. "Good man to have around," Ian said seriously. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy metal bolt. It was shiny and thick. "I found this in my shop today. Thought maybe a space ranger could use a hyperdrive core. What do you think?" He held it out. Leo's eyes widened. He grabbed the bolt reverently. "Whoa, thanks. Go put it in your ship, bud. Dinner's in 5 minutes, Claire said, her voice a little thick. She watched her son run off to his room, then looked at Ian as he stood back up. "You didn't have to do that. It's just a bolt, Claire." They ate at the tiny kitchen table. The grilled cheese was slightly burned on one side. Claire had been distracted trying to tidy up, but Ian ate it like it was a ribeye steak. He didn't complain about the cheap paper plates or the slightly wobbly table leg. "So," Claire started, stirring her soup to cool it down, "how much was the starter, really? I know you said it was lying around, but those things aren't free." Ian paused, a piece of crust halfway to his mouth. "I told you, it was dead inventory. The shop was going to toss it. Mechanics don't toss working parts, Ian. I'm broke, not stupid." He held her gaze. His eyes were a startlingly pale blue, contrasting sharply with the dark smudges under them. "I didn't pay for it. The company absorbed the cost. Let it go, Claire." "Which company?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Where do you work?" A tiny muscle in his jaw ticked. He set his sandwich down and picked up his water glass. "Caldwell Industries. We do a lot of fleet maintenance, automotive contracts." "Oh, Caldwell, the massive tech and auto conglomerate?" Claire raised an eyebrow. "I thought they just bought out smaller companies and fired everyone. Didn't know they actually ran repair shops." Ian coughed, a sudden harsh sound, almost choking on his water. He set the glass down hard. "Yeah, we have a few ground-level divisions. It's mostly heavy machinery. Supply chain logistics. Actually, the global aluminum shortage is creating a massive bottleneck in the chassis production line right now, pushing back Q3 deliverables by at least. He stopped abruptly, his mouth snapping shut. Claire stared at him, her grilled cheese forgotten. Q3 deliverables? Global aluminum shortages? What kind of mechanic talks like a Wall Street analyst? Ian stared back. For a split second, something akin to panic flashed in his pale eyes. He grabbed a paper napkin and wiped his mouth slowly, buying time. Trade magazines, he muttered, looking away. I read a lot in the break room. You want to know if you're going to have parts to do your job. You follow the supply chain. It was a good save, smooth. But Claire's cynicism, honed by years of being lied to by men who promised the world and delivered nothing, flared up. She studied him. The rough hands fit the mechanic's story. The worn boots fit. But there was something else. A quiet authority in the way he took up space. As he reached across the table to grab another napkin, his sleeve hiked up slightly. Claire caught a flash of silver on his wrist. It wasn't a digital sports watch. It was heavy, metallic, with a complex face. She didn't know much about luxury brands, but she knew what cheap looked like. And that watch wasn't cheap. It looked like it cost more than her car. Before she could process it, he pulled his arm back, the sleeve dropping to cover the metal. Look, Ian said, his tone shifting, becoming softer, more grounded. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. I know this is weird. People don't do nice things anymore. But I spend 50 hours a week dealing with broken systems, broken machines, people yelling about things that don't matter. Fixing your car today? Getting my hands on a wrench and actually solving a problem for someone who needed it? He looked at her, his expression entirely stripped of pretense. It was the best part of my week. So let me have this one. Okay? Claire felt the tight, defensive coil in her chest loosen, just a fraction. He looked exhausted. He looked exactly like she felt, bone-tired and seeking a brief respite from a world that demanded too much. Okay, she whispered, but you're doing the dishes. A slow, genuine smile broke across Ian's face, transforming him completely. The harsh lines softened, and he looked suddenly younger, lighter. Deal. As Ian stood at her cramped sink 10 minutes later, scrubbing a pan with far more force than necessary, Claire watched him from the doorway. She was a cynic. She knew the other shoe was going to drop eventually. But as she listened to the hum of the running water and the distant sound of Leo making spaceship noises in his bedroom, she allowed herself, for the first time in years, to just enjoy the quiet. She had no idea that the man washing her cheap pots was currently dodging 6 calls from his board of directors, or that his net worth was roughly $3 billion. She just knew he fixed her car. He was kind to her son, and he didn't run away from the mess of her life. And for tonight, that was enough. For a month, Ian became a fixture in the cramped orbit of Claire's life. He never stayed the night. He would show up on Tuesdays and Thursdays after her shift, usually carrying 2 brown paper bags of Chinese takeout or a cheap pizza. He fixed the flickering light above the kitchen sink. He tightened the loose hinge on the bathroom door. He sat on the faded rug with Leo, constructing increasingly complex spaceships out of mismatched building blocks. Claire found herself waiting for his texts. She hated it. Hope was a dangerous narcotic for a single mother, and she had sworn off the stuff years ago. Yet when Ian looked at her, he didn't see a burden. He didn't look at her with the pitying gaze of her married friends, nor the predatory opportunism of the men she usually encountered. He just saw Claire. But the cracks in his mechanic persona began to splinter, small and sharp. It happened first at the pharmacy. Leo needed a refill on his steroid inhaler. The insurance claim bounced, a bureaucratic error that Claire's provider said would take 3 business days to resolve. The out-of-pocket cost was $280. Claire stood at the counter, her stomach plummeting, frantically trying to calculate which utility bill she could default on to cover the cost. Ian stepped up behind her. He didn't ask. He just tapped his phone against the card reader. A cheerful beep echoed through the pharmacy. Approved. "Ian, what are you doing?" Claire hissed, dragging him away from the counter. "I can't pay you back for that." "I don't need you to," he said flatly, handing her the small white bag. "You work in a garage. $200 is a lot of money." He didn't blink. "I picked up extra shifts. Don't worry about it." She let it go because Leo needed the medicine, but the unease settled in her gut like a swallowed stone. Extra shifts didn't explain the faint smell of expensive sandalwood cologne beneath the scent of motor oil. Extra shifts didn't explain why he casually referenced European market regulations when complaining about a part's delay. The illusion finally shattered on a rainy Thursday morning, not with a dramatic confession, but with a corporate memo. Claire sat at her desk at the dental logistics firm, nursing a lukewarm coffee. The office was in a state of controlled panic. Her manager, David, was sweating through his dress shirt. Caldwell Industries, the conglomerate that had been quietly acquiring supply chain firms across the state, was finalizing their buyout of Claire's company. The CEO was doing a walkthrough of the facility. "Look busy, posture straight, absolutely no eating at your desks," David barked, marching down the aisle of cubicles. "Mr. Caldwell doesn't tolerate inefficiency." Claire rolled her eyes, minimizing her solitaire window and pulling up a blank spreadsheet. She hated these corporate pageants. At 10:15 a.m., the double doors of the administrative floor swung open. The shift in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous, a sudden vacuum of breath and sound. A small entourage of nervous executives filed in, swarming around a single central figure. Claire glanced up from her monitor. The man leading the pack was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that draped perfectly across broad shoulders. His hair was impeccably styled, the messy waves tamed into a sharp, professional cut. He was speaking quietly to David, his expression cool, analytical, and entirely ruthless. He exuded power. Claire's coffee cup slipped from her fingers. It hit the carpet with a dull thud, splashing brown liquid across her scuffed heels. The CEO stopped walking. He turned his head toward the noise. Pale blue eyes met hers. Ian froze. The ruthless corporate mask slipped, completely and instantly. For a terrifying, suspended second, he just stared at her from across the sea of gray cubicles. The man who ate burnt grilled cheese at her wobbly table. The man who fixed her starter. Ian Caldwell. "Mr. Caldwell," David stammered, following Ian's paralyzed gaze. "That's just administration. We can bypass this section." "Excuse me," Ian said. His voice was the same gravelly baritone, but it carried an entirely different weight here. It commanded the room. He broke away from the group and walked straight toward Claire's cubicle. The silence in the office was deafening. Every eye was on them. Claire couldn't breathe. Her mind was a chaotic static of realization, anger, and profound humiliation. He stopped in front of her desk. He looked at the spilled coffee, then back up to her face. "Claire," he said quietly, his voice tight. She stood up. Her legs were shaking, but her spine was rigid steel. She looked at his $1,000 Italian leather shoes, then up to her immaculate silk tie. "My poverty isn't your weekend cosplay, Mr. Caldwell," she whispered, her voice shaking with quiet fury. Before he could respond, she grabbed her purse, pushed past him, and walked out the door. She ignored his calls, 27 of them. She blocked his number, took the bus home, and spent the evening aggressively scrubbing her bathroom tiles until her knuckles bled. She felt incredibly stupid. The expensive watch, the easy way he paid for the inhaler, the mechanic who talked like an analyst. She had invited a billionaire into her home, let him play house with her son, and fed him cheap soup while he probably laughed internally at her squalor. He was a tourist in her desperation. At 8 p.m., a heavy knock rattled her front door. Claire didn't move from the couch. She just stared at the television. "Claire, I know you're in there, please." His voice was muffled through the cheap wood. She marched to the door and yanked it open. Ian stood in the dim hallway. He had shed the suit jacket and the tie. His collar was unbuttoned, his sleeves rolled up, and he looked entirely wrecked. The polished CEO from the morning was gone, replaced by the exhausted man she had swiped right on. "Go away," she said, moving to slam the door. He caught the frame with a heavy hand. "5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. If you want me to leave after that, I will never bother you again." She stared at him, her chest heaving. "Give me one good reason why I shouldn't call the cops." "Because I didn't lie about who I am," he said, his voice raw. "I lied about what I have. There's a difference." Claire scoffed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Oh, save it. You're a bored billionaire who wanted to see how the other half lives. You lied to me for a month, Ian. You sat at my table, watching me panic over a $200 medical bill, knowing you could buy the whole hospital. I paid the bill." "That's not the point," Claire yelled, keeping her voice as low as possible so as not to wake Leo. "The point is the power. You held all the cards. I was drowning, and you were standing on a yacht, tossing me pennies because it made you feel grounded." Ian closed his eyes. He leaned his forehead against the doorframe, letting out a long, shuddering breath. "I started in a garage, Claire. When I was 18, I built Caldwell out of a single auto shop in Queens. I spent 10 years with grease permanently stained into my skin. It was real. It was the only thing that ever made sense." He looked up at her, the vulnerability in his pale eyes startling her. "Then the company grew. It became boards and shareholders and acquisitions. I haven't held a wrench in 5 years. I haven't had a conversation with someone who didn't want my money or my influence in a decade. I downloaded that stupid app on a night when I felt like I was suffocating." He took a half step back, giving her space. "When you texted me about your car, it was instinct. I wanted to fix something, with my hands, and then I met you." He swallowed hard. "You didn't care about startups or portfolios. You just cared that I showed up. You didn't look at me like an ATM. You looked at me like a person. I was terrified that if I told you the truth, you'd look at me the way everyone else does." Claire crossed her arms tightly over her chest. The anger was still there, hot and bright, but the edges were beginning to blur. She recognized loneliness. She lived in it. She saw it mirrored perfectly in the man standing in front of her. "You took away my choice, Ian," she said softly. You made decisions for me by hiding the truth. I don't care how much money you have. I care that you thought I was too fragile or too greedy to handle reality. You're right, he said instantly. No excuses, no caveats. It was selfish, and I am so damn sorry. Silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of the day. Down the hall, a neighbor's television hummed. My company is acquiring yours, Ian said quietly. I'm restructuring the logistics division. I've already mandated a 30% wage increase for all administrative staff and a comprehensive family health care package. Claire narrowed her eyes. Are you trying to buy my forgiveness? No, Ian said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. I'm trying to fix a broken system. You taught me that some things actually matter. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He set it on the small table by her door. I wiped my contacts. My schedule is clear for the weekend. I'm just Ian. I want to take you and Leo to the park on Saturday. No suits, no lies. He stepped back into the hallway. If you throw the phone in the trash, I'll understand, he said. He held her gaze for one long grounding moment, then turned and walked away. Claire stood in the doorway, watching his broad shoulders retreat down the dim corridor. She looked at the phone resting on the table. It was the newest model, sleek and ridiculously expensive. She picked it up. The screen lit up. The background was a picture she had sent him last week. A blurry, chaotic selfie of her and Leo making funny faces in the kitchen. She didn't know if a mechanic and a billionaire could ever really exist in the same space. She didn't know if the anger would fully fade. But as she thumbed the edge of the phone, feeling the solid weight of it in her hand, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to throw it away. Did Ian's massive deception shatter your trust? Or did his desperate need for real connection win you over? Can a relationship survive a lie this huge? We want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Hit that like button if you felt Claire's struggle. And make sure to share and subscribe for more deep, emotional stories like this one every week.